Thank you all for joining this session tonight in regards to Microsoft Azure Cloud Concepts. My name is Alex Chandwana. I work within the Microsoft Cloud space and Dynamic space. Today's lesson in regards Microsoft Azure, we're going to look at the cloud concepts of what actually is involved when we speak about Microsoft Azure, or when we talk about any cloud offerings and what's involved. Before I carry on, can everyone hear me okay? Amazing. So in terms of our cloud concepts, it's only the beginning of what we're going to explore in this series of sessions. So this first session, which will be today, is mainly focused on cloud concepts, where we look at the types of clouds available and other components. In the next session, we then look at what are Azure core services, what's actually within that space. We're going to also explore one of the key areas, which is now involved in every or almost every organization now, which is security, privacy, compliance, and trust, and how Microsoft Cloud or any cloud offering is impacted by this. We're also going to look at the cost of using Azure and how expensive it is, or how we can make it cheaper. So those will be the series of these sessions. So to just give you an understanding in terms of cloud computing, we've all had, it's the buzzword out there now, cloud. So what is it when we speak about cloud computing? In here, we're talking about the delivery of computing services. So it could be a server, which is running Windows. It could be a storage, something for those who use an Apple device. It could be iCloud. It's a storage service, however, that's also called cloud computing. It could be databases, where we have our customer data, where we have essential data for an organization or for a country. We also have networking, how we actually connect to those services. I'm pretty sure some of us have had the experience where you try to either access your iCloud from your network, your mobile phone network, and it becomes very, very slow. Then you go on your Wi-Fi, all of a sudden it's quicker to download those pictures or images you might have in your iCloud. What else comes with cloud computing? Most of the organization now, the key focus is now output. So we're talking about analytics. So there's data feeding in within almost every single organization. They also want to see these analytics either in real time or on a schedule. A lot of organizations out there, if you see, they are so focused on making strategic decisions, which will help their organization grow, which will also help them understand what their customer base or what their clients are more interested in. So cloud computing gives that offering where the data is readily available. So we have a lot of cloud offerings out there. So just to go onto my slide here, so I'm just going to go on the next slide. So in here, what we are going to discuss today, we've already spoken about the definition of cloud computing. However, why do we need to use cloud computing? What are the benefits? Of course, there are benefits to cloud computing. However, I have to be honest, there's also disadvantages. However, it's about how ourselves we then look at the benefits over the disadvantages and how that impacts, in our case, an organization. So an organization is more interested in why do we need to use a cloud. Many organizations as we speak, some of them are still on-premise. I will elaborate exactly what I mean when I say on-premise and why they are on-premise. There are different types of cloud computing. So in terms of cloud computing, we have public cloud. So we have private cloud, we have hybrid clouds. So in here, we need to understand what public stands for, what are the benefits, what are the cons of using such a service. We also have private. Again, the same principle works, where we need to look at why we choose that one over the other. And then you have hybrid. So these free cloud types you're seeing on my screen here, they are the most popular cloud models available in this world. So the key question here is some of us will go into a job, and we need to be able to advise that organization we are working for at which is the best direction to go for, and why do we need to select that direction. So we'll cover on that area where we make that key decision on the way forward. So we also have different cloud services. So in here, I'll give you a more general example in terms of cloud services. So we have IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service. We have PaaS, which is platform as a service. Then SaaS, which is software as a service. Again, all these are cloud services. How we can translate some of these cloud services. For some of us, we have different ways of doing things. So it could be we go online, we make an order for takeaway. In that process, all we have just done is to make an order and the food comes to us. In some cases, we go to our local shop, we buy the ingredients, and we cook the food for ourselves. And in some cases, we buy a half takeaway and we cook food half at home. You're all wondering, why is this guy talking about food? I'm going to translate exactly why this example comes into and why it's very important for us to understand that concept. So I'm going to go back to my slide. You guys can still see my screen okay, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So in terms of cloud computing, we're talking about compute. We're talking about the hardware involved in the whole process. We're talking about the storage involved in the whole process. So just talking about computing itself, you can imagine an organization either in the United Kingdom or somewhere in Africa or somewhere in East Asia. They decide to do a startup organization, and what they do, they provide software to an organization. The next thing which needs to be done here, if most of us, if we happen to have flashback, or if I want to give you the example, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the organization will look for a provider of those computers. So as an example for myself, I'll give an example as in Africa. We'll make an order of these computers, and we'll get told they'll be delivered in 3 to 4 weeks' time. You can only imagine the organization is on the verge of going live to open up their services, and they're still waiting for the delivery. In some cases, the delivery arrives, and some of the products don't work. And then you go through the whole process of returns, or the organization sends you a replacement. So one of the advantages cloud comes into play here and gives us a good offering. It's the ability to go and create these computers on a platform on the cloud. So an organization which provides these services, they're called a cloud provider. The big examples I can give you is this one we're talking about, Microsoft Azure. We also have Amazon Web Services, which is referred to as AWS. We also have another one, which is referred to Google Cloud Platform. Again, that is normally abbreviated as GCP. So in terms of our compute power, we're talking about having our servers on the cloud, being able to spin up an environment. When I say spin up an environment, I'm talking about going on a platform and set up a server. It's not a physical server where I'm having to have a disk drive, somewhere to plug in my USB stick, somewhere to put my power. This is somewhere hosted on a platform somewhere. Again, the same concept applies in terms of storage. So in terms of our storage, what Microsoft have, or most of these cloud providers have, they have something called a blob storage. So it's an ever-expanding platform where you can store your data. And if you're about to reach your max, it keeps expanding. So a blob storage, in terms of storage, is one of the cheapest options available. And it also has a disadvantage whereby your data just basically dumped in one area, and to fetch it from there is not one of the best way to get it from. However, there's other storage options which are available where you can actually store your data on a specific dedicated area, and then you can pick up the data from there. While we're going through this session, guys, if there's something I say which doesn't make sense, or if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box, and we can address those at the end of the session. So one of the key things when it comes to cloud computing, these are very, very key concepts which we all need to do our best to remember, if not research them a bit more. So there's something called high availability. So when we speak about being a cloud computing having high availability, that means it's an organization could run all their services non-stop. They don't have to say we are closed on Christmas Day, or they don't have to say we are too busy, we're not taking any more orders anymore. That's what cloud computing gives you. Where else, in some cases, if you have a physical machine, sometimes you either have to switch it off to cool down the parts if your system is not resilient enough. Cloud computing, again, we're looking at scalability. So I'm sure some of us have seen Amazon, not AWS, but Amazon, the way they deliver their packages. You have Amazon Prime. You have a basic Amazon service. So how that system works is, if you look with this pandemic, Amazon themselves, they know that we're going to be very, very busy. So it's very, very easy for them to increase the resources which are working in your office, and then you're having to travel to get some more machines. With a cloud service, this can be done, and it can be done automatically. You can actually set up things on your system to say, if we're having a lot of traffic, we need to expand these resources. One of the things you need to think about here is, what does it mean for an organization? It means business continuity. It means more profit to the organization. And at the same time, they will be assured to have enough of us on the calls working on their organization, because they know they can rely on you to have these processes in place or to have these recommendations available. So we also have agility, which is one of the points we have here. So we're speaking about scalability. One of the things here in terms of agility is the ability to react quickly. I do apologize, I keep referring to this pandemic here, but if you see how quick it was to start seeing lots of dashboards flying around on the internet to say, in this region, this amount of people are infected by coronavirus, or we have lost this amount of people because of coronavirus. That's all the agility, the ability to react to these things using cloud computing. So you can use these services on demand. It does not necessarily mean you have to sign up or you have to pay for it in advance. You can use this on demand. When something happens, straight away you react. You also have disaster recovery. In terms of disaster recovery, in some cases, I'm sure we have had data centers, which are physical buildings, catching fire. And once they caught fire, it's unfortunate our computers also go. Apart from catching fire, we have had natural disasters like flooding, where the location where our systems are is now flooded. So what that means here, it's our system is now down, and now we are now trying to find a way to reach our customer bases and organization. So why disaster recovery is important? In terms of how cloud computing works in the Microsoft space, which we're speaking about here, there is something they call regions. So what is a region? A region is a set of data centers which are deployed with latency, so they are in sync with one another in real time. However, what happens at that point is you are only accessing one of that data center. I'm going to give an example of the United Kingdom and an example of Africa. So in the United Kingdom, we have two data centers. We have one which is called UK South. We have one which is called UK West. One of these data centers is in London. No one knows exactly the location of it. It's because the security implications involved. We also have another one which is in Cardiff. So if you are using the data center in London, and in the event that has caught fire or there is a serious emergency, the system automatically sends you to the other data center in Cardiff. So what that means is you're not losing business, you're still running things within your organization. The same applies in Africa. There is two data centers which are in South Africa. One of the questions here is why just two data centers in Africa? Main reason being, one is security, two is also a business strategy from Microsoft. So once business starts expanding, you will happen to see there will be more and more of these cloud computing data centers coming. I can tell you Amazon are building data centers as we speak in Ghana, and they are expected to go live at any point now. So we spoke about fault tolerance, disaster recovery. We also have fault tolerance. So I'm sure you have seen, some of us have had that experience. You try to plug your headphones in and it doesn't work. Or you try to save some stuff on your computer. It tells you you don't have enough space. So in some cases, things stop working. One of the best things cloud computing brings is fault tolerance. What we mean by that is if things happen to fail, there's always a computer which is readily available to take over from the other one. So again, you can only imagine if you have a set of computers on premise, the cost and the effort it takes for you to move from one area to another. We also have elasticity. So these things I'm talking about here, they are key components of cloud computing for every single cloud provider which are out there already. However, different cloud providers can use different terms, but these are the ones Microsoft use. So we have our customer where we are based in the United Kingdom, and we are working with a company in South Africa as an example, or we are working with a company in Nigeria, and this company said, we do not want our data to stay outside of Africa. We need our data closer by, and also mainly for performance reasons. So you do not need to get to Heathrow Airport or any airport to get to Nigeria, South Africa, or any country out there for you to start saying, okay, that's fine, I'm going to set this up for you. This can be done remotely. All you just need is a URL into Microsoft Azure, which I will show you during this class today. You get in there, you create your servers, you create all the required components by that organization. We also have customer latency capabilities. I'm sure most of us have gone to a website and it's taken a lot of time to load. In some cases, it times out. So what cloud computing offers here is this latency capability, which is referred to as CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. What that means is we know we have our colleagues working in this area, the data stays in their local network. What that means is it's now faster and it's much quicker. Predictive cost consideration. This is a talking point amongst a lot of organizations in terms of cost. A lot of people say cloud computing is very cheap. However, I disagree on that. The reason for that is in terms of cloud computing, it's cheaper if you switch off the machine. But again, it then defeats the whole object of us being able to scale some of these services to our global organization or our customers. So it's very important to kind of look at this cost in a holistic way. I have a question here. Someone says, does this include Salesforce? And someone says, can you explain high availability again? They couldn't hear me. And the other question here is, does data location in terms of distance affect data management? So we'll start with high availability. So high availability, like I said already, it's the ability for us to be able to run services for longer periods of time without any limitations. At the same time, if we have an upgrade, we can divert our services to another server and our work still carries on. So there's no limitation because you're using a cloud service. You're not thinking of a PC you have in a physical PC where you need to change either the hard drive or the RAM. For Antonia, you ask, does this include Salesforce? Can you please elaborate a bit more what you mean by that? Then I can explain that further. Yep, so the key concepts. Yes, so Salesforce in itself, it also used to be an on-premise system which was hosted by a physical computer, and some organizations still use it. However, the world is changing. So these concepts here also apply to things like Salesforce. So I'm not a Salesforce expert myself, but working in the dynamic space and Salesforce being our competitor, I'm pretty sure we are working along the same concepts in terms of cloud computing. Another one from Michael about data location in terms of distance and affects data management. That's a very good question. So at some point 2 years ago, there was a law which was passed in Europe, which is called GDPR, which is a General Data Protection Regulation. So what that means, it's people have the right to be forgotten. And I'm sure most of us, we have seen this whole issue about Brexit and the UK coming out of it. So what many companies, UK companies, are saying now is we want our data to stay in the United Kingdom. Before this law came into effect, most organizations in UK, they'll just select data centers in Europe, which is one was in Amsterdam and one in Ireland. However, because of this change, there's now an effect on data management. The data now has to stay in the United Kingdom. And that's one of the key drivers as well in having data centers in South Africa, because many African organizations, they were hesitant in getting their data to be hosted somewhere else. So We have a question from Dami as well in terms of the data centers in Africa. Yes, they serve Africa. So those two data centers, again, they are in sync. So they serve Africa. And one of the good things about that as well is it means we have access to cloud services in a much quicker way. However, how cloud computing works in terms of these data centers as well, there are services which are used in the Americas and not being used in Africa. So those services won't be available in Africa, or those services won't be available in Europe. So disaster recovery is on every single data center for Microsoft. Yep, so Michael, you're 100% spot on there. Security and accessibility, yep, is very, very important to data management. You can only imagine if you breach data laws for a specific country, how much your organization will be fined, and also how much your customer base is affected. So if you look as an example in China, China makes it clear that the data for their people needs to stay in their country. So they actually have their own data centers where the data stays there. Again, the same applies to Germany. Germany, they actually have something which they call government cloud, which is just for their government alone, because some of the compliance and security which is required by their government is not available within the public cloud computing we have. So yes, data management, very, very important area. So now we're going to look at economies of scale. So you can only imagine the operations which are happening in Microsoft, in Amazon, in Google Cloud. These are very, very large organizations. So in looking at economies of scale, it then gives the ability to look at the cost, and at the same time making sure there's efficiency on the customer side. So there's quite a lot of considerations here when we start looking at economies of scale. So we need to understand, okay, if we're getting this service here, is it worth us going for? So I'm in the UK at the moment, and I'm setting up a service in Microsoft Azure. My customer I'm working with is in UK. Then I go and see there's more services provided in the Americas cloud computing platform, and I set up my data center there. One of the problems here is the Americas cloud platform is very, very expensive. So the pricing is different across different regions. Secondly, there's now compliance. There's no more efficiency anymore because there's a lot of traffic for me to actually connect to this area. So it's very, very important for us when we are thinking about setting up our cloud platform to say, okay, what is involved into it? It's similar within our own households. We don't just wake up in the morning and we say we are going to buy a car or we are going to buy a takeaway. One of the things we do, we start either thinking about it, we start making a plan, how we're actually going to achieve it. So it's those kind of things we need to put ourselves into that space where we are thinking from a wider picture. How does that impact the organization? Where does the organization benefit in this decision we are making? So in here, we have capital expenditure and operational expenditure. So in terms of capital expenditure, this is spending money on physical infrastructure. So when you're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about the physical machines. So we're paying upfront, and then we deduct the expense from a tax bill over time. So capital expenditure is there's an upfront cost always involved. We also have operational expenditure. So if you see on the screen here, you have the pros and cons of each other here. So there's no upfront cost. However, if there's no upfront cost, you pay as you use the service, you get billed straight away. Very good example here for operational expenditure. If you think a few years back, we used to go into a shop and buy a disk for Office to use Word and Excel. Now you just go on the Microsoft website, and they'll charge you $5.99, if not $6.99 a month. So basically, you don't use the service until you pay for it straight away. So that in itself is another example of cloud computing. So you're not paying later, you're paying straight away. So here, this is where a use case of operational expenditure comes into it. You could also have a small organization. Within this small organization, when I mean a small organization, it's an organization which is not willing, which is not a high-end organization. For example, a two-band organization, you can go for a pay-as-you-go area. Antonia, you mentioned here, I suppose pay-as-you-use would be more expensive than upfront payment. Again, another very, very good question. So here, the answer is yes and no. The yes is yes, because it's a one-off cost. You're paying upfront, so it will be very, very expensive. And the no here, it could be very, very cheap, because you're just getting that small component of the service you want to use. So if we look at the example of Office, in some cases, if you see Office doesn't come with DevOps, you then have to go buy DevOps separately, right? However, if you're talking about a corporation, they're now talking about different licensing models. You're talking about an E1 license, an E3 license, an E5 license, and those come packaged in one area. However, the challenge here is, are you buying things you're going to use, or you just buying things you're going to exploit at a later point? So again, we need to be careful when we're actually making these decisions in terms of capital expenditure and operational expenditure. So in this specific area, we need to work with our project manager to understand exactly what is the budget we have available before we make that decision. One of the disadvantages in terms of operational expenditure as well, some of the services are available within capital expenditure. You don't get them when you're doing pay-as-you-go. And in terms of pay-as-you-go, in some cases, if you do not set up your cloud system properly, you end up using some of these amazing cloud components, and you then get billed for it. So you start seeing a high bill. One of the things Microsoft or these cloud providers don't do, they do not stop you from using the service. They have your credit card details, so they know they will be able to take the money from there. So a consumption-based model, again, here we're still talking about this pay-as-you-go model. There's no need to purchase or manage the infrastructure. So again, here it's not a physical machine. It's a physical virtual machine, which is on the cloud, which you just control by going on the site and you start managing your infrastructure. So there's no need of you going to purchase that or to manage it, because that is being done for you. You also have the ability to pay for additional resources. So you pay for a service which you're using. So I'm going to give you an example of Dynamics 365 for those of you who have had it. So basically, Dynamics 365, it's a platform which is mainly used for customer relationship management, e-commerce, and within the financial services area. So you're an organization which just does e-commerce, and you do not want to have the customer relationship part. So it gives you the ability where you can just get that e-commerce part, and then later on you realize you need something else. That option is still available for you. And in terms of pay-as-you-go, you only pay when the virtual machine is running. when the computer is on. It's not on within our own office or within our household. It's running from a virtual area, from those data centers we're talking about. So the next thing here is we're talking about this infrastructure, we're talking about cost, we're talking about data management. What is the types of clouds available? So there is mainly 3 of them which are available, which I mentioned in the beginning, and let's see what they are. So we have public cloud. So a public cloud, you do not manage the servers. All you're basically doing there is accessing it via the internet. So a cloud platform we can talk about here. We can talk about Salesforce, which is being run from a server by an organization. We can talk about DevOps. Of course, we install the software on our machine, but most of it is cloud. It's being run by Microsoft. They run the updates on there on your behalf. Why do we have public cloud? Some organizations, they do not want the responsibility of running these things. So while we're talking about public cloud, I'm going to show you the other 2, and then we're going to look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of these types of clouds. Again, why is it important for us to understand these types of clouds? So when we have a business requirement, we understand which direction and which recommendation we need to give to our clients or from our employers. Okay, so we have a question here from Oak, which says, could you explain what you mean by a virtual PC being on? Do you mean once a virtual PC has been built or turned on, because this virtual machine can be turned on and off? Yep. So what I mean by that is once a virtual machine has been built, yes, it can be switched on, it can be switched off. However, if your organization, it's a multinational organization, expecting different customers from different regions, not even multinational, but they expect customers to go online and order clothing, we still expect our PC to be on. But the option to switch it off, yes, definitely it is there. So if you have a pay-as-you-go model, you can switch it on when you are using it, then switch it off when not using it. So, okay, please elaborate. So someone asked, what is DevOps? So for some of the colleagues on this call, they're using this platform. So this platform is used to manage project items. So you can imagine if you're working in a team of 10, and within your project, you have someone doing QA, you have a business analyst, you have a developer, you also have an architect. So once you have your requirements, you then create these in a backlog. So there's something called a backlog. So within that backlog, you create the requirement and then also generate some tasks. So that task is then assigned to someone. So this could be assigned to an individual person or to a team. Why do people use DevOps? It helps keep track of where we are in terms of our project. At the same time, it brings us together as a team together, because we are working together as a team. We are not waiting for someone to forward an email to us. Everything is on the open, and we could be working on the same thing. So if it's in DevOps, we all have visibility to it, and we can have a successful program. So we have another one here. Please elaborate on what a virtual machine is. So a virtual machine is a computer which is running in a data center, which is owned by one of the cloud providers. So you can have a computer in your house, but in this case of a virtual machine, this is not running in your house. you are accessing it via the internet. So the difference here is it's not a physical computer you have. It's something running on a data center somewhere. So we spoke about public cloud. We are going to look now at the other cloud. We're talking about private cloud. So private cloud, it's an organization. They'll go. Okay, so before I talk about the cloud server, we have another one in terms of a virtual machine. That is it more like a server? Yes, indeed, that would be more like a server. However, Microsoft in the past 2 years, they've also started introducing access to actually a personal computer for someone to use on the cloud. Instead of you having a massive laptop, you can just access it from a tablet while you're on the move. But it's still gaining traction. It's not matured yet. So we're talking about private cloud. So an organization will go either for capital expenditure, they'll buy something on the Microsoft space, which is Azure, and then they build these servers. They build these virtual machines. Why do that? In some cases, you want to be able to manage these systems yourself. You want to be able to see exactly how your platform is running. And at the same time, you might have compliance requirements within an organization. So you need to make sure you have it as private. We are going to discuss in depth of what public cloud and private cloud is. So before we carry on to the next one, we have something says, can we say emulators are virtual machines? In terms of emulators, which emulators are we speaking about here? While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to look at the other one from OC, which says, is the data held with the providers encrypted, or can the likes of Amazon, Microsoft see the data when tier services are being used? So yes, Microsoft in particular, they have something called a telemetry, where they have virtualization. They see the data of what's coming in terms of your system. They're not seeing the data you're recording. They'll only go and look at the data you're recording if you give them permission to go and look for it. So again, it's a very contentious question. Reason being is no one gets access to these data centers. You will never be able to know where it is. You'll never be able to have a sniff to actually see what's in there. So they say, yes, no one sees it. So there are obligations which are signed for compliance reasons, which I will share in the next session, where they're not meant to open customer data. So yes, there is encryption, and there's also security in place. Is there a relationship between cloud computing and API? So yes, there are relationships. So you can set up your APIs connection with cloud. It depends what you're looking to achieve. In this example, I'm going to use an example of the police force in the UK, which is the Metropolitan Police in London. What they do, which is a project I worked on a year or so ago, they use Dynamics 365, and they have an API which then connects to Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Why are they going to do that? They're going to capture intelligence. So there is a connection between Dynamics 365 and using an API. So yes, there is a relationship between those, and those APIs and cloud computing, they're basically like a cousin and a cousin of one another. So we're going back to mobile emulators as a virtual machine. Okay, that's much more clearer. Yes, That's right. So these are virtual computers somewhere, which say if this person requests this, provide them with this. So those, yes, there are virtual machines somewhere. We just don't see them. All we just see is a visualization of the emulator, whether it's a helicopter simulation or a car racing simulation. That's all done by a virtual machine. So now we're going to go on the next type of cloud. We've spoken about public and private. The next one is a combination of public and private. This is called a hybrid. So it combines public and private, and it allows applications to run in the required location, depending on the customer needs. So we've now spoken about these three types of clouds. Just to start off with public cloud, one of the advantages with a public cloud is there's no capital expenditure. You do not need to buy a new server. So you talk about, someone mentioned Salesforce earlier. You go and buy Salesforce. You don't need to buy a server if you are using cloud computing. The server is held somewhere. All you are given is a portal. You go and set up your URL, your access, then it goes and provisions your environment back to the server. And applications can be provisioned much quickly. So you can only imagine that time we used to run a CD to install a software or a system. That's something which is fast going away. So you can have that advantage using a public cloud. There's no responsibility on the organization to start saying we need to do patching of the server. There's no maintenance of that server. So if that server goes down on a public cloud, it's the responsibility of the cloud provider. In most cases, there are SLAs, which are service level agreements between the customer and the cloud provider to say, if your system goes down, we aim to get it back up to you within the hour. In some cases, 24 hours. It depends with the SLAs in place. When you're using a public cloud, you can only imagine an example of someone who specializes in Dynamics, in Salesforce, in any of these cloud softwares. Most of them, they do not need to be an expert in how a server runs. So if you are using a public cloud, you don't need an additional expert who understands how servers work, because the networking is done for you, and the servers, they are managed by Microsoft. One of the disadvantages of public cloud is security. So there may be specific requirements for specific geographical reason, a specific country, or a specific continent. So if you're using a public cloud, some of the security requirements cannot be met by using a public cloud. And again, talking about security, that also means government policies. So you can only think the UK have their own government policies. A country like Norway, Sweden, they have their own government policies in terms of how organizations operate, in terms of their people's data or organizational data. So a public cloud might not meet those obligations. So again, that's why it's very important when we are having this discussion with our customer, our friends, like, why do we need to use this public cloud? What are the advantages of it? What can be a challenge for us? And at the same time, like I said, there's no ownership of the hardware. So what you are given or what you are paying for is what you get. So you cannot jump in there and say, okay, oh, this year is 2021, I'm going to upgrade my server. No, you then have to wait for the service provider or the cloud provider to do it for you. So if you see in terms of the public cloud in itself, you can only think, okay, someone else is managing this infrastructure for me. How do I know when they're going to make an upgrade? How do I know if there's a problem with that system they hold for me? So what Microsoft have, they have a portal which they report their issues. That's the portal I will also show you. So this portal here, you see the messages, and it also have a health dashboard, which tells you Azure is running, your Office 365 has a problem, it can even be Outlook. So again, it's very important for you, someone who's working with a cloud service, to be able to tap into this portal to see what is coming, new changes, new upgrades, even problems. That way you can communicate to your teams you'll be working in. So in some cases, how this portal is very important. You could have an issue, and you spend lots of time you're scratching your head saying this is not working. Just takes a minute, you log into this portal, you realize there's a problem, and it saves you time from trying to fix something you can't fix. So again, so someone said your slides are not changing. I still see the hybrid cloud slide. Yes, we haven't moved yet. We're just talking about the advantages and disadvantages of these cloud types. So once we finish that, we'll log into the portal, and I'll show you where this portal is. So in terms of a private cloud, it's more of an opposite of a public cloud. So private cloud, you have control over those virtual machines, those computers you have set up in the cloud. It's your responsibility to make sure you put security updates on them. It's your responsibility to make sure they're running to meet your organizational needs. In terms of security, most organizations, they will have security teams in place. That will be their role to come in and put security protocols in place, because you have control over the infrastructure. And where there is compliance involved, you have overall control for it. However, something to always keep in mind, it's amazing to have this control. It's brilliant. You can just log in, you look how your things are running. If you and your organization make a mistake and your security has been breached or you've been hacked, the responsibility is yours in your organization. You cannot go to Microsoft and say, oh, we have our cloud here and now we've been hacked, so cloud computing is really bad. The very first thing they will ask you is, what were your security prioritizations within your organizations? What security did you put in place? And if you don't have it, it's more or less a problem you have to resolve internally. The disadvantage of private cloud, that's where there is expenditure at the get-go, capital expenditure, because you need to be able to run those virtual machines, those servers, so you actually have to pay straight away. Private cloud as well is not as agile as a public cloud. Main reason for that is you're running a public cloud, Microsoft or these cloud providers, they're more or less targeting a wider audience than just targeting a company for Alex. And at the same time, you then need to have a lot of skills within your organization. If you have a private cloud, you just don't have someone to understand Salesforce or Dynamics 365. You then also have someone to understand networking. You also have someone to understand security. So all those things are required. You also need a business analyst who understands cloud. You also need to have a project manager. So if you look at it from our perspective, it's the opportunities in the space, they are vast. The question here is, you understand it, then when you go onto the market, you have a wider understanding of what we are saying. So in my own personal experience, before I understood cloud, I got into conversations where I couldn't get involved because I didn't know what's being spoken about. So even though I knew Dynamics 365, I was just a passenger when people were talking about cloud. So again, it's just important for you to be able to understand what's out there. So again, on the last one, hybrid cloud. So it's now that combination of the pros of public and the cons of private. So there is a bit more flexibility in terms of a hybrid cloud. So you have a question here before I carry on, which says, is it possible for cyber crimes to target data on the cloud? Every single second, they're always trying. That's for sure, without a doubt. Every single second, cyber crime, they're always targeting things on the cloud. So am I right to say private cloud is same as the traditional data center? Yes, it is the same. The only difference is you just don't have the physical things in your data center. So are there specific code names for the clouds? So when you mean the clouds, do you mean the cloud providers, or we are speaking about these hybrid clouds? And the other one is, please, why do you think organizations would subscribe to hybrid cloud? So in some companies I've worked in, which was in the financial sector, they wanted to actually see and not put their eggs in one basket. So you put some services on a public cloud and some on a private cloud. So once you do that, is if the Microsoft public cloud has a problem, your services running on the private cloud, they're not affected. Vice versa, your services running on the private cloud, they're affected. Microsoft is not affected. Services are still running. So it gives you more possibilities. It also gives you more options. So in terms of compliance and security, you can have that on a private cloud, so you can control that to meet the organizational needs, which are not met on a public cloud. So another question here is, how long did you learn this to handle it easily? So in terms of this course we're doing here, it is the foundation of Azure. So it gives you the base of Azure. So in my own experience, it took me up to 6 weeks of learning, trying things, and also asking questions. So the basic, the foundation, is not something I can say it's not achievable. I'm 100% confident all of us on this call will be able to understand this at the end of the session in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So another one is opting for hybrid, a fail-safe measure. In some cases, yes, it can be translated like that. In some cases, it can be translated as a cost-saving measure. So it just depends how the organization thought process or strategic decision is at that specific time. So most of the time, if you are a project manager, business analyst, or if you are the Azure engineer, you're working with solutions architect, so there is a steering group here where you're working together. So is opting, so hybrid cloud may be too expensive to run then? 100% yes. You can only imagine Microsoft, they're not really bothered about you running something private, something public. All they're just saying is you are using a service, so you need to pay for it. So a very good example here, which is slightly similar to what we are saying here. You can have 2 mobile phones, one which is on a contract and one which is pay-as-you-go. On the pay-as-you-go, you need to top up that phone for you to be able to make a phone call. That network provider is not going to say to you, oh, we know you have a contract, so we're going to give you free calls on your pay-as-you-go phone. So yes, it can be very, very expensive. Is this training geared towards the basic cloud certification? So this training is geared towards Microsoft Azure fundamentals, which is AZ 900. So if there is someone on this call who will be interested in going for the certification, kindly contact the administrator, and we can arrange for you to go through that path for the exam. Is there any certificate to back up this Azure Cloud? Yes. So the fundamentals, which is called Azure 900 or AZ 900, is the foundation building blocks of additional courses. So you then also have Azure Administrator. You also have Azure Technology Designer. You also have an Azure Solutions Architect. So it depends which direction of travel you are looking to go into yourself. However, Azure Fundamentals is not just focused on going through the Azure path. It's also focused, if you are learning as a project manager, if you are learning as a Scrum Master, you need to understand these technologies. Reason for that is I'm sure with this pandemic, you have all started seeing Zoom come on the space. You have Microsoft Teams. We have free call here. You need to be able to get into an organization, and you need to be able to understand that technology exists. So you are not an Azure engineer, but you understand that this is a cloud service I'm using here, and I'm going to learn how to use it this way. So what roles do you apply with Foundation Azure certification? So again here, like I said, Azure Fundamentals is the base of these certifications, and you can use it. You don't necessarily need to be an Azure expert. You can use it as a business analyst. You can be asked as a business analyst to capture requirements for a cloud migration. So you need to be able to understand, okay, we're capturing the requirements here, and if you don't understand the basics here, then in some cases you struggle. So yes, it's very, very important. The Azure certification in itself, it validates your knowledge of cloud computing. So in here, Azure certification, this will be AZ 900 as a starting point, and you can upgrade it to be an administrator. However, if you are going on the business analysis pathway, or if you're going on the Scrum Master pathway, I wouldn't recommend you start going for the administrator certification. The fundamentals will be sufficient enough to take you through. Is this relevant to software testing? In here, I have to confess, I'm not an expert in testing. I understand there's manual testing and automation testing. The question here is, does the service run on a cloud service, or is something installed physical on a machine? If it's something run on a cloud platform, then yes, you will need to understand how these things work. So in some cases, if I remember seeing someone doing testing, they had to install something on a server. So yes, you can have a virtual machine which is running your automation testing software. So yes, it does apply. So going to the next thing, so these are the things we have spoken about a few moments ago in terms of cloud model comparison. So those who are taking notes or those on the call, I will share these slides with the admin, so you can also have them available as a reference point. So now the next thing is to go to the Azure portal. So we spoke about the Azure portal. So again, this is where you're gonna see that I also learn something every day. I'm gonna see if you'll be able to see my screen if I just drag the tab here. So can you guys see my Chrome browser just put in here? Okay, great, fantastic. So in here, I'm going to go to the Azure portal. So I'm going to go to azure.portal.com. So before I hit enter, you need to be able to remember this if you are going to be able to set up a virtual machine in Azure, or just for you to be able to see it. So one of the things I recommend here is as part of something as homework to take away from this session is to go and sign up to Azure Portal. You get 12 months of free trial. They give you $150 for you to spend on the systems they have on the platform. So I'm going to hit enter, and it doesn't get me to it. So let's see why. Portal.azure.com. So what you see here is now asking me for a login. I've got quite a few of these things I use to test and try out different things. So this is our portal in here. So if you can see here, 150 credit limit. So this one here, I specifically created it today for this session, so you're able to actually see this coming up. So what you can see in here, there's a whole wide range of things you can do in here. So you have resource groups, virtual machines. So we spoke about virtual machines earlier. If you see in here, it's already asking me create. One of the things in Azure, you have these three lines on the top left hand side here. So it says show portal menu. So I've clicked on it. What this is referred to, some tend to refer it to as the blade. So for those there's someone who just said you have to enter debit card details. That discourages me. Again, if you can reach out to the admin, I'll be able to share with you a training voucher where you don't need to put your credit card details. So you just basically use the code I'll give you, and you'll be able to sign up. So again, in here, it's very, very important to just understand what's in here. So again, there's a whole lot of things in here, and it depends exactly what you're looking to achieve with your organization. So you see, it says Azure services. So let's see what services we have in here. Then you can kind of understand the scale of what Azure can achieve. So everything you're seeing in here is things which are used for cloud computing. So if you see here, we're talking about computing. And in here, we're talking about networking. So you can only imagine we are running a private cloud. I will not be able to understand how networking works. So you then need an expert to cover just this alone. And in terms of storage, if you don't know how to manage storage, again, you need someone who will do it for you. And we spoke about APIs, right? So in here, you have API management services. We also spoke about CDN profiles, which is content delivery network, which is this one here. So this is, again, where things we can use. So these are things available to use. So I mentioned Dynamics 365. So Dynamics 365, in the past 17 months, the focus has now switched from Microsoft. It's now being branded under the Power Platform family, where you now have Power Automate for automation. I'm not going to go into a lot of things in here because that will divert us from the topic we're discussing here. So you can see app services, you have Power Platform in here. One of the things you also have, you have an option to search here. So I'm going to deliberately search for Salesforce. So I do not see something related to it. So what I can do in that case is to go and use the API service or create a virtual machine. In here, you can see you have cost management and billing. So it tells you how much you've spent and how much your bill is going to be like. So there's quite a lot of variation of things you can see in here. So we spoke about issues happening within the Microsoft public cloud and how we can look at those things and help us, give us insights. So we're going to look at another portal. So this is called portal.office.com. So in here, disregard everything you're seeing in here. You basically go into the admin area. However, there's a caveat in here. If you do not have either a service administrator role or the required permission to see the data, you won't be able to see this, so you will need to ask someone to have a look at it for you. So I'll show items in here. This is the area. This is your friend. This is someone you need to be familiar with. So I'm going to go on Service Health. It's going to show me all the services Microsoft are running on the cloud. So if you see in here, we have Exchange Online. There's an advisory. So what that means is there is a message here to say there's either a problem which is under investigation or it's been diagnosed, but your users might have an issue. You have Azure Information Protection. So if you see all these, they're all healthy. So again, you start seeing you have Sky for Business here. If there's an issue in here, there will be an incident. So you can actually go into incidents. There is nothing in here. But if you happen to think you have an incident, you can also report it yourself, and they'll be able to say it. So to help you to stay ahead, to help you to stay informative of what's happening around the cloud computing space as well, you also have this message center. So in here, there's messages of things Microsoft are doing to say, on this specific date, we are going to be making this change. On this specific date, this is available. So we have this one here, which is referring to Yammer. So saying general availability of the new Yammer. So again, if you see, this was posted on the 2nd of July. So you can just simply open it, and you can see on the right-hand side here, it's telling you what's coming. So these are the two important portals, the office.portal.com and this portal.azure.com. So I'm going back to the slides so we can go on with that. So in here, this is what you need to get to, portal.azure.com, and then just have a look at what's in there. Just to see, explore, make yourself comfortable with what you're seeing in there. I'm not expecting anyone to be an expert, but I'm expecting and I'm confident we can all be comfortable navigating around that area. So I'm going to go on the next slide. So we're going to look at the types of cloud services. So in here, again, exactly what we just been discussing a few moments ago of the responsibility of who manages what. So in this slide here, on premises, on-premise, if you have those physical servers, that's also private cloud. It's your responsibility, whether it's those machines or it's virtual machines on the Microsoft cloud. It's your responsibility to manage any applications running on there. It's your responsibility to manage the data and access. So all these things. So here in this slide is showing some of the differences. So infrastructure as a service, you're managing these, and these ones in blue, this is what the cloud provider manage for you. So again, we spoke about food earlier, and you are still wondering, okay, this guy hasn't spoken about what he meant when he's talking about food, ordering takeaway, buying ingredients, and we cook ourselves. So at this point here, we are buying the ingredients. We are buying a mixture of foods. We are cooking it at home. We are putting the amount of salt we need. We are putting the amount of spice we need. So again, in here, it's our job. No one is going to put the salt in that food for us. We need to put that salt ourselves. We need to put that recipe ourselves. So that's the main responsibility of our private cloud. We have someone saying, is it possible for us all to have access to the voucher? Yes, as part of our training, yes, I have a training voucher, which I can share with everyone else who needs to explore this. Fantastic stuff. Infrastructure as a service. So again, just putting this into general real-life terms, this is where we're ordering a bit of takeaway, and then we are making either some additional dish at home to put on the table. So we have a mixture of things here. So what you're seeing here is not your responsibility when you order takeaway to then deliver it yourself. It's now the service provider of that takeaway bringing it to you, and then you are combining with what you have cooked yourself at home. Then again, slightly similar to platform as a service. So platform as a service, you're more or less still mixing a bit of that takeaway and a bit of the home cooked food, but most of the food is takeaway. Most of the responsibility is away from you. Most of the responsibility is with the service provider for Microsoft. We then look at software as a service. Again, in here, you're just having a top layer. You have had most of your food, all you just bring into the table now is some dessert or some afters to eat. So again, most of the responsibility lies on the cloud provider. But if you see one thing which is consistent here across all these services, the data and access is your responsibility. No one is responsible for your data. It belongs to your organization. It belongs to your customers. You decide who you want to see it. You decide who you don't want to see. Microsoft do not know how your organization works. It's yourself who need to make that decision. So again, we have infrastructure as a service, just more or less recapping on what we have covered. So again, if you see here, most basic cloud service, and again, these slides, like I said, they'll be available. So being cautious of time, I'll just run through this because we've spoken about them already, and you'll be able to see them. There is one additional thing I need to show you before we can close off. So in here, this is the global reach. So as of today, this is where the data centers for Microsoft are across the world. It is the biggest cloud provider in the whole world. So in terms of biggest provider, they are the ones with most of these data everywhere. So if you see most of them in here, America, then you have some grouped up in here in Europe, and then other regions. So again, this is up to date as of today. So again, this is just to show you how we can reach our customers in different regions using cloud computing. You can only imagine you are an organization in Brazil here, and you're ordering something from East Asia. How long it will take for someone to actually package it, accept your order, then send it to you. In some cases, things do get stolen on the way. However, using cloud computing, things are just always there. And if you can see one of the things here, we spoke about each region has 2 data centers. However, that story is not the same for Southeast Asia and Brazil South. One of the things is mainly because of security. They are struggling to find a secure place to have these things. So most of their disaster recovery is done within the specific data center. However, if disaster strikes, there's flooding, there's a problem. But again, this is just to show you a visualization of how the cloud has grown in the past few years. So just to summarize, we spoke about the types of cloud. We talk about private, we talk about hybrid, we talk about public cloud, and the advantages and disadvantages of these. So one of the things I have here is to also help each other here. So I have some links on this slide. So once you have this slide, please feel free to look at the cloud computing terms. Feel free to look what Azure is. Try to understand and also ask questions if you need to. It's not a problem at all. Azure compliance offerings, Azure Architecture Center, Azure Compute Options. this is to help you understand exactly the offering by Azure. So I've got a question here. Is it bigger than AWS, as in Microsoft? Coming from a Microsoft background system myself, I have to be honest, AWS is much ahead of Microsoft. Reason being is AWS, they started way ahead in terms of cloud computing before Microsoft came to the scene. However, Microsoft have more data centers, so they have a global reach. So if you talk about an organization in Africa telling them or use AWS and your data will be in America or Europe, sometimes people are hesitant. So in terms of the offering of what they have within the platforms, AWS are ahead. And in terms of security, it depends what we are using here. So if you are using a private cloud, that will be down to yourself to make sure it's secure. But in terms of public cloud, AWS and Microsoft, the security element also depends on what we are measuring it on. Are we measuring on the types of attacks they've had? Are we measuring it on things they have in place in terms of security? I would say they're almost the same. The key question is to see how many organizations using different platforms have been impacted. Thank you so much for attending the session this evening. We'll carry on again next Sunday. I'll confirm that with Deji, but I'll be available next Sunday, and we'll carry on looking at Azure. So if anyone has any questions, we still have 3 minutes. Please feel free to ask the questions, and I'll do as much as I can to address those.